I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who brings a fraud affidavit to Christmas Eve. I always imagined my Decembers smelling like cinnamon and pine, not ink and certified mail. But here I was, 35 years old, sitting on a plush rug that had seen 3 generations of family photos, watching my mother clear her throat like she was about to read the morning announcements at the elementary school where she used to work. The fireplace crackled. The tree blinked in that slow, hypnotic rhythm of cheap LED lights. And in her hands, a single sheet of paper, printed in 14-point serif font, held like a verdict. Welcome back inspired real events. Before I dive into how I got there, let me tell you who I am. My name is Laya. I count other people's money for a living. I'm a forensic accountant at a mid-size firm in Charlotte, which means I spend most of my nights cross-referencing deposit slips against bank statements while my coffee turns to ice water. People think forensic accounting sounds like something out of a thriller movie, but it's really just patience with a calculator. Numbers don't lie. They just wait. They wait for you to stop looking at the surface and start tracing the seams. I built my career on that quiet certainty. I built my life on it, too. I married Dean when I was 29. He's an engineer who speaks in blueprints and measures his words like he's checking load-bearing walls. We bought a small house with a fence that's been waiting for a fresh coat of paint for 4 years. We have 2 girls. Emma is 8 now, all scraped knees and fiercely held opinions about which crayon shade counts as real blue. Cora is 5, a whirlwind in mismatched socks who still believes glitter solves everything. We earned every inch of our life on our own hours. I never asked my parents for a dime. I never expected them to cover a down payment or babysit through a flu week, or even notice when I stayed up till 2 in the morning balancing our household ledger just to sleep soundly. I liked it that way. Independence felt like armor. But armor doesn't keep out the cold, and your own family decides you're invisible. My parents, Diane and Roy, live in the same brick house I grew up in, 30 minutes outside the city. Every Christmas Eve, without fail, we gather in that living room. Same artificial tree with the lopsided angel my grandmother crocheted in 1994. Same platter of cinnamon rolls cooling on the counter. Same quiet hum of football on the television. Same aunt and uncle drifting in with store-bought wine and tired smiles. 2 years ago, my mother introduced a new tradition. She called it accountability. I call it what it was. A quiet little guillotine. She printed a document, taped it to the mantel, titled it in crisp, unapologetic type, "Grandchildren Who Deserve Gifts This Year." I asked why my girls weren't on it the first time. Emma was 6. Cora was 3. I genuinely didn't know what kind of respect a toddler was supposed to demonstrate to qualify for a toy train. My mother folded her arms, the way she used to when a student handed in a late assignment, and told me my daughters hadn't shown enough consideration for the family this year. I stared at her. I actually smiled, a soft, breathless thing that caught in my throat because I thought maybe she was joking. Maybe it was a test. Maybe she'd laugh and hand me 2 wrapped boxes and tell me she was just checking if I'd notice. She didn't laugh. She just turned back to the mantel and adjusted the angel's crooked halo. Bate, my younger sister, didn't look up from where she was arranging gold-foiled presents under the tree. She's 37 now, a single mom to 9-year-old twins, Aiden and Olivia. She's always been the one who takes up space without asking permission. She slammed doors when we were kids. She called our mother at midnight sobbing over broken leases and unreliable boyfriends. She cried loudly, and our parents responded instantly. Volume is a currency in houses that mistake crisis for importance. I never competed with it. I just cleaned up the spill. I filed the insurance claims. I co-signed the paperwork. I drove 3 hours to notarize documents I hadn't read because my father asked nicely and said it was just a formality. I was the reliable one, the steady one, the one who showed up. I didn't realize until much later that reliability is just another word for availability. And availability is just another word for being used. That first Christmas Eve, I sat on the carpet while Aiden and Olivia tore into tablets and winter coats with fur-lined hoods. Emma sat beside me in a little green dress, pulling at the hem, watching. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "Why didn't Grandma have my name?" I didn't have a good answer. I offered the usual polite fictions. Maybe she forgot. Maybe there was a mix-up. But the words tasted like ash before they left my mouth. I looked at Bate. She was helping Olivia peel plastic off a screen. She caught my eye and gave me that half-smile. The kind that isn't really a smile at all. "Maybe next year if they behave," she said, light as a weather report. Like it cost her nothing. Like my daughter's worth was something they could earn if they just tried harder to be quiet. I packed my girls up that night. Emma fell asleep in the back seat holding a single candy cane someone had handed her at the door. One candy cane. That was her Christmas from the family that shares blood with her. I drove home in the dark, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, telling myself I'd handle it differently next time. I always tell myself that. It's the quiet lie that keeps you walking forward. Last Christmas played out like a carbon copy. The list went up. Same font, same title, same two names, same blank space where mine should have been. My mother handed out gifts she'd wrapped in gold foil. Emma sat on the carpet. She didn't ask this time. She just folded her hands in her lap and watched the lights blink. Cora kicked her feet and traced patterns on the rug with her toe. I felt something crack open behind my ribs, slow and clean, like ice giving way on a pond. I looked at my father. He was peeling the label off his beer and studying the carpet like it held answers. I looked at my mother. She didn't meet my eyes. She told me, without looking at me, that I was welcome to bring something for the girls myself if it mattered that much. As if the issue was logistics. As if my daughters had been left off a grocery list and not a measure of who counted and who didn't. I drove home again. The house smelled like pine and old paper. I tucked Emma into bed. She turned her face to the wall and whispered, "I made a card for them anyway." My chest tightened so hard I had to sit down on the edge of the mattress. I kissed her forehead. I told her I loved her. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water I didn't drink. I sat in the dark and listened to the refrigerator hum. That was 2 years ago. The invitation came in early November this time. A group text. My mother's favorite management tool. Christmas Eve at our house, 5:00 p.m. Bring a side dish. Kids should be on their best behavior. The last line sat on my screen like a splinter. Kids should be on their best behavior. Dean read it over my shoulder and set his jaw. "You don't owe them a performance, Laya." He was right. I knew he was right, but Emma had already seen the text. She'd been standing behind me in the kitchen, reading over my arm the way 8-year-olds do. And before I could put the phone down, she was already talking. "Can we make cards for Grandma and Grandpa? I want to draw a reindeer. Cora can do the glitter." She said it with so much hope that I felt my throat close up. Cora came running in 30 seconds later, already asking for the craft scissors. They spent 3 weekends making those cards. Emma drew a reindeer with crooked antlers and wrote "Merry Christmas, Grandma and Grandpa. Love, Emma," in her best printing. Cora covered hers in glue and gold stars and signed her name in letters so big they ran off the edge of the paper. Dean watched them from the doorway one evening and turned to me. "If they get hurt again, we don't go back." I nodded. I agreed. But I hadn't told him yet what I'd found 2 months earlier. The thing on the credit report. The thing I was still pulling apart piece by piece in the quiet hours after the girls went to bed. I don't raise my voice. I never have. Not at work. Not at home. Not even the time a client threw a binder at my head during a deposition. I ducked. I picked it up. I handed it back to him and said, "Page 14, third column. It's not that I don't feel things. I feel them the same as anyone. I just learned early that noise is the enemy of accuracy. And accuracy is the only weapon that doesn't backfire." In the Hale household, the loud one was always Bate. Bate slammed doors. Bate called at midnight. Bates' chaos was treated like proof that she needed them more than I did. I never competed with that. I was the one who picked up the pieces after the noise faded. I filed the claims. I called the lawyers. I co-signed when my father asked. And over the years, the family settled into a pattern. Bate made the mess. I cleaned it up. And my parents treated Bates' chaos like proof that she needed them more than I did. I didn't argue with the logic because for a long time I didn't see it. When you're the one holding the mop, you don't notice that nobody thanked you for showing up. You just keep mopping. I raise paper trails, not my voice, and paper trails take time. They take patience. They take the kind of person who sits with spreadsheets at 2 in the morning and doesn't stop until the columns reconcile. That's why what I found didn't scare me. It made me thorough. In August, Dean and I applied to refinance the house. Interest rates had dropped and we wanted to knock 2 years off the mortgage. Straightforward. We'd done the math. Our credit was clean. Our debt-to-income was manageable. I'd already pre-qualified through our credit union. 2 weeks later, the loan officer called. Her name was Sandra, and she had the kind of voice people use when they're about to deliver bad news slowly. "Mrs. Greer, everything looks good on your husband's side. But on yours, there's an account here we need to discuss." I told her I'd review the report and call her back. Dean was at work. The girls were at school. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and pulled my full Tri-Bureau credit report for the first time in years. I hadn't checked it in a while, not out of negligence, just the particular blindness of someone who trusts their own numbers. I'd always been careful. I'd never missed a payment, never carried more than $500 on a credit card. Never opened a line of credit I couldn't close inside 6 months. So when the PDF loaded and I started scrolling, I expected to see a clean ledger. My name, my accounts, my history, and it was clean, all the way down to the 3rd page, where a revolving line of credit appeared that I had never opened, with a lender I had never contacted, carrying a balance I had never authorized. The account was opened in March of 2017. I stared at the screen for a long time. I almost didn't scroll further. I wish I could tell you I slept first. I didn't sleep. I requested full account records from the lender that night. Transaction history, original application, authorized signatories. I used my firm's legal database to pull the filing documentation. Everything was time-stamped. Everything was traceable. That's the thing about debt. It always has a paper trail. Even when someone doesn't want it to. The lender confirmed receipt of my records request and told me to expect the documents within 10 business days. 10 business days. I marked the date on my kitchen calendar, the one Cora had covered in butterfly stickers, and I went back to work. But something had shifted. You know the feeling when you walk into a room you've been in 1,000 times and notice a crack in the ceiling you've never seen before, and then you can't stop seeing it. Every surface becomes suspect. Every familiar corner holds the possibility that the foundation moved while you were sleeping. That's what the next 10 days felt like. I dropped the girls at school. I reviewed audit files at the office. I cooked dinner and helped Emma with her multiplication tables and read Cora 3 chapters of a book about a talking badger. And every evening after the house went quiet, I sat at the kitchen table and pulled everything I could remember about March 2017. Because March 2017 was the month my father's contracting business went through what he called a restructuring. And it was the month he asked me to sign some paperwork he said was a formality. The records arrived on a Tuesday. I opened the envelope at the kitchen table after the girls were in bed and Dean was on a late call with a client in Seattle. The account was a revolving line of credit, maximum limit $200,000. Opened March 14, 2017 with First Piedmont Financial. The primary account holder was listed as Laya Hale, my maiden name, my social security number, my date of birth. The authorized cosigner field had a signature I recognized, but had not written. My hand, or rather, something close enough to pass a processing clerk's glance on a Tuesday afternoon 8 years ago. The first draw was $18,000, 3 weeks after the account opened. It went into a checking account I did not recognize. I turned to the next page. More draws. April 2017, 9,500. June 2017, 14,200. The pattern continued. Irregular amounts every few weeks. Never the same number twice. Someone had been pulling money out of an account in my name for 8 years, and not once had a statement been mailed to my address. I checked. The mailing address on file was my parents' house. My parents' house. I set the papers down on the table and pressed my palms flat against the wood. I'm a forensic accountant. I trace exactly this kind of thing for clients who suspect their business partners of skimming. I know what it looks like when money walks out the back door wearing someone else's name. I'd just never been the someone else. The account was still active. The current balance, the amount someone had drawn under my name and never repaid, was $148,000. I turned off the kitchen light and sat in the dark for a while. My breath came slow. Tears pricked hot and fast behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not yet. I wiped my cheek with the back of my hand and let out a quiet, broken laugh that sounded more like a sigh. 8 years, 8 Christmases, 8 birthdays. 8 times I'd driven to that house, brought a side dish, smiled at the list, and told myself it was just about behavior. It wasn't about behavior. It was about containment. March 2017. I'd been 26, fresh off my CPA certification, still close enough to my parents to drive home on weekends and help my father with his books. His company, Hale General Contracting, had been small but steady for 20 years. Then he tried to scale up. He took on a subdivision project he didn't have the capital for, partnered with a developer who turned out to be leveraged to the ceiling. When the developer pulled out mid-build, my father was left holding $200,000 in materials costs and no revenue to cover them. He called it a restructuring. What he meant was the business was hemorrhaging, and he didn't want to say it out loud. I remember driving up on a Saturday that March. My mother had made soup. My father was at the kitchen table with a stack of papers and a face like he'd been awake for 3 days. He pushed a few pages across the table and asked me to sign. Just a formality, he said. Family co-sign for the business line while we sort things out. Your credit's better than mine right now. It'll be off your name in 60 days. I signed. I was 26. He was my father. I didn't read every page. I didn't pull the filing copy. I didn't ask why a family cosign needed my social security number and date of birth on a separate form. I signed because that's what the reliable one does. And then I drove home and went back to my spreadsheets. 60 days came and went and he never mentioned it again. And I never asked. That was the crack in the ceiling I'd been stepping over. I went back to the records. The cosign wasn't a cosign. It was a primary account application. My name, my credit. My identity used to open a revolving line that my father drew against whenever the hole got deeper. The signature on the original application was close to mine, but not mine. Whoever filled it out had practiced or had access to enough samples to get the loops right. The mailing address was set to my parents' house from day one. No statements ever came to me. No alerts. No calls. They'd buried the account so deep that the only way I would have found it was exactly the way I did. A routine credit check for a mortgage refinance. The thought of that made my hands go still on the keyboard. If Dean and I hadn't decided to refinance, if the interest rates hadn't dropped, if Sandra, the loan officer, hadn't been thorough enough to flag the anomaly, I would never have known. My name would have kept carrying the debt. My credit would have kept absorbing the hits. And every Christmas, my mother would have kept tapping a list to the mantle with my daughter's names missing. And I would have kept driving home in the dark, wondering what I'd done wrong. I didn't call my parents. A younger version of me might have. She would have picked up the phone and said, "Dad, what is this?" and given him a chance to explain, to minimize, to reclassify the damage as a misunderstanding. But I'm not 26 anymore. I'm a forensic accountant. I don't call people when I find discrepancies. I pull the full ledger first. So that's what I did. I spent the next 3 weeks building a ledger, not for a client, for myself. I pulled every transaction from the first Piedmont account. 8 years of draws, payments, interest charges, fees. I cross-referenced each draw against dates I could verify, holidays, birthdays, school enrollment periods, Bates' custody hearing in 2019, the year her ex stopped paying child support. I used the same methodology I use at work. Date, amount, corresponding event. Destination account. Forensic accounting is just storytelling with receipts. You lay out the numbers in order and let them narrate what happened. And what they narrated was this. The large draws clustered around 2 events every year. The first was September, back to school. The second was December, Christmas. Every September, a draw between 8,000 and 15,000. Every December, a draw between 10,000 and 20,000. The Christmas draws spiked the year my mother started the list. In December 2023, the first year Emma and Cora were excluded, the draw was 19,400. In December 2024, the second year, it was 16,800. I printed the ledger on my office printer after hours. 12 pages. I highlighted the December draws in yellow and the September draws in blue. The pattern was so clean it could have been a teaching example in one of my firm's training modules. And the destination. Every single draw routed to the same checking account. Not my father's business account, which had been closed since 2019. Not my parents' joint household account. A separate account at a credit union in Statesville held in my mother's name alone. From that account, the money moved outward. To Bates' landlord. To Bates' car payment. To Bates' twins' private school tuition. And to a gift budget that my mother tracked in a spreadsheet she'd titled Christmas Deserving List Budget. I sat in my home office at 11 on a Wednesday night with 12 pages spread across my desk and a calculator I didn't need. $148,000. That was the total drawn under my name across 8 years. $148,000 in credit that existed because my father needed to cover a hole he'd dug and my mother needed to fill the life she'd built around my sister. I'd organized the ledger into 3 columns: date, amount, and where it went. Column 3 was the one that mattered. $62,000 to Bates' household. Rent, car, utilities paid directly from my mother's Statesville account. $34,000 to Aiden and Olivia's private school tuition at Lake Norman Academy. $28,000 to what the spreadsheet called holiday and birthday gifts, the tablets, the coats, the gift cards in ornamented envelopes, all the things my daughters watched their cousins unwrap while they sat on the carpet with nothing. $24,000 to miscellaneous. Cash withdrawals, a kitchen renovation at my parents' house, 2 vacations I was never invited on. The numbers told a story that was simpler than I expected. My parents hadn't stolen my identity to feed an addiction or cover a gambling debt. They stolen it to fund a lifestyle they couldn't afford. One in which Bates' children were provided for, and mine were not. One in which the deserving grandchildren had their tuition paid with money borrowed under their aunt's name. And one in which the easiest way to keep the secret was to keep the person whose name was on the account as far from the family center as possible. The list on the mantle was never about behavior. It was a firewall. Numbers don't get embarrassed. They just add up. And $148,000 adds up to a lot of Christmases my daughters never had. I stared at the tuition line for a long time. $34,000, Lake Norman Academy. Bate had told the family she'd gotten a scholarship for the twins. She told everyone at Thanksgiving 2 years ago, standing in my mother's kitchen with a glass of wine, announcing that Aiden and Olivia had been recognized for academic promise. My mother had beamed. My father had raised his beer. I'd congratulated Bate and meant it, because I didn't know that the scholarship was my credit score wearing a costume. The deserving grandchildren weren't being rewarded for good behavior. They were being subsidized with money my parents had taken from me without asking. And the ranking system, the list, the exclusion, the shrug, the maybe next year. It was the scaffolding my mother built to keep the structure standing. Push Laya away. Keep Laya's branch at arm's length. If Laya doesn't come to Christmas, she doesn't ask questions. If Laya's kids don't get gifts, Laya stops showing up. And if Laya stops showing up, she never pulls her credit report out of curiosity and finds a $148,000 account she never opened. The exclusion wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was risk management. My mother, the retired school secretary, had run a better containment operation than half the CFOs I'd audited. I closed the spreadsheet and turned off my desk lamp. Outside, a neighbor's Christmas lights blinked red and green against the fence Dean still hadn't painted. I thought about Emma drawing her reindeer with the crooked antlers. I thought about Cora's gold stars running off the edge of the paper. I thought about how they still made cards for grandparents who had spent their Christmases before they were born buying their love with my name. Then I opened a new document and started drafting a fraud affidavit. I didn't call my parents. I called Renee. Renee Davis is a colleague at my firm, a fraud examiner with 12 years of identity theft casework, and the kind of calm that comes from having seen the worst version of every family financial crime. I told her the situation over coffee on a Thursday morning, and she listened without interrupting, which is how you know someone takes you seriously. When I finished, she sat down her cup and said, "How far do you want to go?" I told her I didn't want to destroy anyone. I wanted my name clean, the debt off my record, the account closed. She nodded. Then you need 3 things: a fraud affidavit, sworn and notarized, an identity theft report filed with the FTC, and a formal dispute with all 3 credit bureaus citing the fraudulent account. She paused. Once you file the affidavit, the lender is legally obligated to investigate. If the investigation confirms fraud, and it will, because the signature doesn't match and the mailing address was never yours, the debt gets reassigned to the actual party who opened the account. I asked what that meant for my parents. Renee looked at me evenly. It means the $148,000 becomes their legal responsibility. The lender can pursue collections, negotiate a settlement, or take civil action. That's between them and the bank. I sat with that for a moment. My parents would owe $148,000 to a lender they'd been hiding from for 8 years. It wouldn't be my choice. It would be the consequence of theirs. I'm not going to argue with people who already know they're wrong. I'm going to file the paperwork and let the numbers do what numbers do. Renee helped me draft the affidavit that afternoon. By the end of October, I understood the full architecture. My father's business collapse was the origin. My mother's need to keep the family stable, or at least to keep up the appearance of stability, was the engine. Bates' financial dependence was the destination, and my identity was the fuel. The list wasn't a parenting philosophy. It was a ledger entry with a ribbon on it. Every year my mother taped that sheet of paper to the mantel. She was reinforcing the same structure. Bates' branch gets funded, Laya's branch gets pushed out, and nobody asks where the money comes from. The if they behave wasn't about Emma and Cora's manners. It was about mine. Behave meant don't dig. Behave meant don't ask. Behave meant keep being the reliable one who signs things and doesn't read the fine print. I need to stop here for a second. If you've ever been the reliable one in your family, the one who signs, who covers, who never makes a scene, check your own credit report this week. Not because I'm paranoid. Because I waited 8 years to look. 8 years of someone else's debt sitting under my name while I helped my daughters make reindeer cards for the people carrying it. If this is hitting close, hit subscribe and stay with me. It gets worse before it turns. I filed the fraud affidavit on December 10th. The identity theft report went to the FTC the same day. Renee walked the dispute letters to the post office herself. Certified mail. Return receipt requested. All 3 bureaus. The clock started. The lender had 30 days to investigate. By the time they reached a conclusion, Christmas would be over. But Christmas was when I needed to be in that room, in front of witnesses, with the truth in a box. I spent the first 2 weeks of December assembling what Renee called the disclosure packet. It wasn't dramatic. It was 12 pages of documentation. The same 12 pages I'd printed on my office printer, plus a cover sheet summarizing the account history, the total drawn, and the destination of funds. I added copies of the filed fraud affidavit and the FTC report. I included a 1-page timeline showing every December draw mapped against every Christmas my daughters had been excluded. And at the top of the first page, in 12-point type, I printed a single line. Account number 44,710,029. Opened in the name of Laya Greer, née Hale. March 14, 2017. Total drawn to date, $148,000. That was the line my mother would read first. I didn't add commentary. I didn't write a letter explaining how I felt. I didn't include a list of demands or conditions. The numbers were the commentary. Renee reviewed the packet and told me it was clean. No emotion. No accusation, just documentation. She paused. "You sure you want to do this on Christmas?" I told her it was the one day every member of the family would be in the same room. Aunt Carol would be there. Uncle Pete. The cousins. Everyone who had watched my daughters sit empty-handed while Bates twins opened tablets would be present to hear the truth. Renee raised her eyebrows. Public accountability. I shrugged. I'm not ambushing anyone. I'm returning their paperwork. I bought a gift box from the craft store on my lunch break. Red cardboard with a removable lid. The kind you'd put a scarf in. I slid the folder inside and carried it home in a shopping bag. The box sat on my dresser for 3 days before I wrapped it. I consulted a consumer protection attorney named James Whitfield, a referral from Renee's firm. He reviewed the affidavit, the credit reports, and the transaction ledger in a single afternoon. His opinion was direct. You've already filed. The investigation is underway. Once the lender confirms the fraud, and based on these records, that's a foregone conclusion, the account gets flagged, the debt reassigns to the parties who opened it, and your credit restoration begins. 60 to 90 days. I asked about criminal exposure. Whitfield leaned back. Opening a line of credit using someone else's identity without their knowledge is a felony in North Carolina. You could file a police report. I told him I wasn't going to do that. He nodded like he'd heard that answer before. Then the civil path is clean. The affidavit protects you. The lender pursues your parents for the balance. That's between them. I asked one more question. Once this is filed, can my parents talk their way out of it? Whitfield almost smiled. The paperwork is already in the system. They can't unring a bell that's already been heard by 3 credit bureaus and a federally regulated lender. This isn't a conversation anymore. It's a process. A process. That word settled over me like a coat. All my life, I'd been told that the quiet ones get overlooked, that the people who don't shout get drowned out. But a process doesn't need volume. It doesn't need anger. It needs documentation, timestamps, and a signature from someone authorized to verify the truth. I had all 3. 2 weeks before Christmas, the bell was already ringing. Some things shouldn't be whispered. They should be unwrapped. Let me be clear about where things stood. By December 14th, 10 days before Christmas Eve, the fraud affidavit was filed and notarized. The FTC identity theft report was logged. Dispute letters had been received by all 3 credit bureaus. I had the certified mail return receipts in a folder in my desk drawer. The lender had opened their investigation and assigned a case number. James Whitfield had confirmed in writing that the civil process was irreversible and that the debt reassignment would proceed regardless of what my parents said, agreed to, or promised. My credit freeze was in place. No new accounts could be opened using my information. The 12-page disclosure packet was printed, assembled, and sitting in a red box on my dresser. Dean knew everything. I told him the week I got the records back from First Piedmont, sitting at the kitchen table after the girls were asleep. He listened the way he always does, completely still, hands flat on the table, eyes on mine. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What do you need from me? Not, are you sure? Or maybe we should wait or think about the family. Just what do you need?" I told him I needed him in the room on Christmas Eve. I needed someone standing next to me who knew the truth and wouldn't flinch. He nodded once. That was it. Emma and Cora didn't know anything. They were busy with school concerts and holiday parties and the reindeer cards they'd made with so much care. I'd already decided they wouldn't be in the room when I gave my mother the box. Dean would take them to the kitchen for cinnamon rolls. The truth was mine to deliver. The girls didn't need to see their grandmother's face when it turned white. I chose Christmas Eve for one reason. It was the only day every year when the full audience was assembled. My mother had spent 2 Christmases tapping a list to the mantel and reading it aloud in front of Aunt Carol, Uncle Pete, their son Marcus, Bate, the twins, Dean, and my girls. She'd performed the exclusion publicly twice because the public performance was part of the containment. If the whole family accepted that my daughters didn't deserve gifts, then nobody questioned where the gift money came from. The audience was the shield, so the audience would hear the truth. I'm not a vindictive person. I didn't choose Christmas to ruin it. I chose it because the lie had been staged there, in that living room, in front of those people, and the correction needed the same stage. Renee had told me I could mail the packet. Whitfield had told me the legal process didn't require a face-to-face disclosure, but credit bureaus don't look people in the eye. Certified letters don't sit across from Aunt Carol at the dessert table and explain why her nieces went home with nothing for 2 years while the money was being drawn under their mother's name. I didn't need my parents to apologize. I needed the people in that room to know the truth. So the story my mother had built, the story about deserving and undeserving grandchildren, couldn't survive past December 24th. The red box sat on my dresser. The tag said from the girls in Emma's handwriting. She offered to write the tag, and I'd let her because the gift technically was from them. They just didn't know what it contained. I wrapped the box on a Tuesday night after the girls went to bed. Red paper, the thick kind with the matte finish, not the shiny grocery store roll. I cut it carefully because the box was small and I didn't want bunched corners. Dean sat on the edge of the bed and watched me fold the edges, and neither of us said anything for a while. The folder inside was slim, 12 pages plus the cover sheet. It weighed almost nothing. I taped the last seam and turned the box over to smooth the bottom. Emma's tag was already attached, from the girls, in her careful 3rd-grade printing, with a small reindeer drawn in the corner because she puts reindeer on everything in December. I tied a piece of white ribbon around the box because it seemed like the kind of thing you do. Dean finally spoke. It looks like any other Christmas present. That was the point. It would sit under the tree alongside Bates' gifts and the twins' gifts and whatever wine and cheese set Uncle Pete brought every year. And nobody would look at it twice. A small red box with a children's tag. Inside, 8 years of documentation. Inside, $148,000 of someone else's choices made in my name. Inside, the end of a story my mother thought she'd buried so deep it would never surface. I set the box on the dresser and turned off the light. It sat there for 3 days next to my earrings and Dean's watch, catching the edge of the street light through the blinds. Every morning, I woke up and looked at it before I looked at anything else. It was still there. It was always going to be there. On the morning of December 24th, I almost left it behind. I was standing at the bedroom door with my coat on, keys in my hand, and the box still sitting on the dresser. Dean was downstairs loading the car. I could hear Emma telling Cora to hurry up with her shoes. The house smelled like the cinnamon sugar cookies they'd baked the night before, packed in a tin for the drive. I looked at the box and thought about what the next 3 hours would look like if I just left it there. We'd drive to my parents' house. We'd eat. The list would go up. My daughters would be excluded again. Bate would smile and I'd drive home in the dark and tell myself next time. The same lie for the 3rd year running. I thought about Emma asking, why didn't Grandma have my name? I thought about Cora signing her name in letters so big they ran off the paper for people who'd used her mother's name to pay for someone else's children. I picked up the box. It was light. That surprised me every time. How something that carried so much weight could feel like nothing in your hands. I put it in my bag between the cookie tin and my phone charger and walked downstairs. Dean saw the shape of it through the canvas and met my eyes. He didn't ask. He just picked up Cora, buckled her into her car seat, and started the car. The drive was 40 minutes. Emma sang along to the radio. Cora fell asleep before we hit the highway. Dean kept one hand on the wheel and one on my knee. Nobody talked about what was in the bag. Nobody needed to. We pulled into the driveway at 10 o'clock. My parents' house looked the way it always does in December. White lights along the roof line, a wreath on the door, the glow of the tree visible through the front window. Bates' minivan was already parked on the street. Uncle Pete's truck was behind it. The whole cast was assembled. I carried the cookie tin in one hand and my bag in the other. Dean had Cora on his hip. Emma walked ahead, clutching the reindeer cards she'd made, already talking about where she'd put them on the mantel. The smell hit me the second my mother opened the door. Cinnamon rolls, warm, sweet, thick in the air. The same recipe she'd made every Christmas Eve since I was 9 years old. For a moment, standing in the doorway with that scent wrapping around me, I could almost forget why we were there. Almost. My mother hugged Emma stiffly and told Cora she'd gotten tall. She didn't look at me long enough to notice the bag. The living room was exactly as I remembered. Same tree, same angel, same cluster of wrapped presents underneath. And there, taped to the mantel beside the stockings, a fresh sheet of paper in 14-point serif font. The list. This year it was longer. My mother had added a column. Reason deserved. Next to Aiden's name, excellent grades. Next to Olivia's name, helped Grandma with yard work. Below the twins' names, a blank space where Emma and Cora would have been. I slipped the red box out of my bag and set it beneath the tree, behind the bigger packages where nobody would notice it yet. My mother waited until everyone had drinks and the twins were settled on the floor near the presents. Then she walked to the mantel, pulled down the sheet of paper, and held it up the way a teacher holds a spelling test she's proud of. Before we start, I want to read the list. She said, it's important that the children understand how this works. She read Aiden's name first. Applause from Bate. She read Olivia's name. More applause. She paused at the blank space at the bottom and looked at me. We talked about this last year, Laya. The girls are welcome to try again next year. Try again. As if my 8-year-old had failed an entrance exam. Emma was sitting on the carpet next to me. She didn't say anything. She just looked at the presents under the tree and then down at the reindeer cards in her lap, the ones she'd spent 3 weekends making. She put them face down on the floor. Cora didn't understand what was happening. She was 5. She was watching the lights on the tree and kicking her feet. Bate leaned forward from the couch and caught my eye. She was holding a glass of wine and she smiled the same smile she'd smiled last year. The one that looks like sympathy but tastes like vinegar. Maybe next year if they behave. Same 5 words. Same weather report delivery. Aunt Carol shifted uncomfortably on the love seat. Uncle Pete studied his shoes. My father sat in his recliner with a beer balanced on the armrest and his eyes on the football game. The room waited. Everyone expected me to do what I always do. Say nothing. Pack up. Drive home in the dark. I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I walked to the tree, reached behind the stack of gold-foiled presents Bate had arranged at the front, and pulled out the red box. It was the size of a shoebox, wrapped in matte red paper with a white ribbon and a tag in Emma's handwriting. I carried it across the room. The carpet was soft under my feet. The football game murmured from the television. My mother was still standing by the mantel with the list in her hand, watching me with the expression she uses when she thinks someone is about to make a scene. I wasn't going to make a scene. Dean caught my eye from the hallway. I gave him the smallest nod and he touched Emma's shoulder. "Come on, girls. Let's go check on the cinnamon rolls." Emma hesitated. She looked at me, then at the box in my hands, then back at me. I smiled at her and meant it. "Go ahead, sweetheart. Save me one with extra icing." Dean took Cora's hand and guided both girls toward the kitchen. I waited until I heard the kitchen door close. Then I turned back to my mother. The room was quiet. Bate had stopped smiling. Aunt Carol was watching me. Uncle Pete had put down his drink. My father had muted the television, which was the first time in my life I'd seen him do that voluntarily. I held the box out to my mother with both hands. She looked at it like it might be heavy. It was. It weighed almost nothing. My mother took the box. She held it at arm's length for a moment. The way you hold something when you haven't decided whether to open it or set it aside. The ribbon shifted. Emma's tag caught the tree light. From the girls, with the little reindeer in the corner. Bate said, "That's sweet," in a voice that meant the opposite. My mother looked at me. She was waiting for context, an explanation, a preamble, the kind of soft introduction I always provided before anything uncomfortable. I didn't give her one. "This is from the girls. Open it now." I said it quietly. The way you'd say the light is green, not angry, not pleading, just a fact that required a response. My mother must have heard something in my voice she didn't recognize because for the first time in 2 Christmases, she didn't look to Bate for a cue. She didn't glance at my father. She pulled the ribbon, lifted the lid, and took out the folder. It was slim, manila, 12 pages plus a cover sheet. She held it the way people hold documents they didn't expect to receive, loosely, as if the paper might explain itself without being read. Aunt Carol leaned forward on the love seat. The room had the particular stillness of a place where everyone has stopped breathing at the same time. My mother opened the folder to the first page. Her eyes moved to the top line. She read it and the color left her face the way water leaves a cracked glass, slowly at first, then all at once. The first line read, "Account number 44,710,029. Opened in the name of Laya Greer, née Hale. March 14, 2017. Total drawn to date, $148,000. My mother's hands trembled. She gripped the edge of the folder and her knuckles went white against the manila. She read the line again. I watched her eyes track left to right twice. And then she looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face. Not anger, not denial, recognition. The look of someone who has just realized the ceiling they've been ignoring has finally cracked open. The room didn't understand yet. Aunt Carol was squinting, trying to read the page from 6 feet away. Uncle Pete had leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. Bate's wine glass was frozen halfway to her mouth. My father hadn't moved. He was staring at the muted television screen like a man who has decided that if he doesn't look at something, it isn't happening. My mother's voice came out thin. "Laya, where did you get this?" It wasn't a question. It was a door slamming shut on a room she'd kept locked for 8 years. I stayed standing. My hands were at my sides. My voice was even. From First Piedmont Financial. "The lender you used when you opened a line of credit under my name without my knowledge in March of 2017. Aunt Carol made a sound. Not a word, just an exhale. The kind that comes when the air gets knocked out of a room. My mother turned the page, the ledger, the draws, the dates, the column titled Destination. From the kitchen, faintly I could hear Cora laughing about something. The cinnamon rolls were still baking. The timer hadn't gone off. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I spoke the way I speak in depositions. Clear, measured, citing the record. Over 8 years. $148,000 was drawn from that account. $62,000 went to Bates' household. Rent, car payments, utilities. $34,000 went to Aiden and Olivia's tuition at Lake Norman Academy. $28,000 went to holiday and birthday gifts for the children on your list. $24,000 went to renovations and vacations I was never told about. I paused. The only sound was the kitchen timer ticking faintly through the wall. The reason my daughters aren't on that list has nothing to do with their behavior. It has to do with the fact that every gift under this tree was paid for with a credit line in my name. And the easiest way to keep me from finding out was to keep me and my children out of the room. Bates set her wine glass down so hard it rang against the coffee table. That's not true, she said it fast. The way you say something when the truth is arriving and you're trying to outrun it. Aunt Carol looked at my mother. Deanne, is this real? My mother didn't answer. She was still holding the folder, turning pages now. The transaction history, the destination accounts. The spreadsheet she herself had titled Christmas Deserving List Budget, her own words, in her own spreadsheet. Printed on my office paper. I let the room sit with it. I didn't fill the silence. Silence is where the truth does its best work. Then I said the only thing left to say. You didn't run low on money. You ran out of my name. My mother started crying, not the kind of crying that means someone is sorry. The kind that means someone has been caught and hasn't figured out which version of the story to tell yet. She clutched the folder to her chest like it was the thing hurting her and not the thing she'd done. We were going to fix it, she said. We were going to pay it back. You don't understand the pressure we were under. Bates stood up. Her face had gone from shocked to furious in the time it takes to turn a page. So now you're punishing my kids. You're doing this on Christmas to punish my children. I looked at her. Your children's tuition was paid with money taken from me without my consent. That's not punishment. That's an account statement. Bate opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. Aunt Carol had her hand over her own mouth. Uncle Pete was shaking his head slowly, looking at the floor. My father spoke for the first time. His voice was low, rougher than I expected. And he didn't look at me when he said it. I never wanted you to find out like this. There it was. Not I'm sorry. Not I shouldn't have done it. Just I never wanted you to find out. The distinction matters. He wasn't sorry he'd taken my name. He was sorry the ceiling finally fell. For 1 second, I saw something on his face that looked like real shame. His jaw tight, his eyes wet, his hand gripping the armrest of the recliner like it was the only thing holding him upright. Then he looked away. We always meant to fix it, he said. Same words, same deflection, different mouth. I let the room settle. Then I spoke one more time. The fraud affidavit was filed on December 10th. The identity theft report is with the FTC. All 3 credit bureaus have received formal disputes. The investigation is already underway, and the lender has been notified that the account was opened without my knowledge or authorization. My mother looked up from the folder. What does that mean? She whispered. It means the debt is being reassigned to the people who opened the account. You and Dad. The $148,000 is yours now, legally. My name comes off the account. My credit gets restored. The process takes 60 to 90 days. Bates' voice cracked. You went to a lawyer. You went to a lawyer against your own family. I turned to her. I went to a fraud examiner because that's what this is. Aunt Carol stood up from the love seat. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair without saying a word. Uncle Pete followed. Neither of them looked at my mother. I didn't need to explain anything else. The folder in my mother's hands explained it all. Every draw, every date, every dollar that had traveled from my name to Bates' rent check, to Olivia's tuition statement, to the gold-foiled presents under this tree. The kitchen timer went off, a bright, high sound cutting through the silence. Nobody got up to check the cinnamon rolls. The smell drifted through the house. Sweet, warm, unchanged, as if the oven didn't know that everything else had shifted. I picked up Emma's reindeer cards from the carpet where she'd left them face down. I smoothed them flat. My girls will never earn their place at a table. Not this one. Not any. Then I went to the kitchen to collect my daughters and my husband, and we drove home. The investigation took 71 days. First, Piedmont Financial confirmed the fraud in February. The signature analysis alone was enough, but the mailing address discrepancy and the absence of any communication to my actual address sealed it. The $148,000 was formally reassigned to Roy and Diane Hale. Their names, their debt, their problem. My credit score recovered by April. The refinance went through in May. Dean and I knocked 2 years off the mortgage the way we'd planned before any of this started. Bate lost the tuition funding the day the lender's letter arrived. The twins transferred from Lake Norman Academy to public school by March. Bate called me once in early March and left a voicemail that alternated between crying and blaming me for tearing the family apart. I didn't return the call. Aunt Carol called me separately. She said she'd had no idea and that she was sorry she'd sat in that living room for 2 years and never questioned why Emma and Cora were excluded. I told her I appreciated her saying that. My parents didn't call. My mother sent a text in late January. 4 sentences about how they'd made mistakes under financial pressure and hoped I could find it in my heart to understand. She did not use the word sorry. She did not mention my daughters by name. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The process was working the way processes do, without emotion, without argument, without anyone's permission. Emma's reindeer cards are on our refrigerator now. She never asked about her grandmother's list again. A child should never have to be good enough to be loved. And neither, it turns out, should you. That's my story. 2 little names left off a list. 1 box under a tree, and 8 years of someone else's mistakes signed in my name. If this reminded you to pull your own credit report, to stop earning a seat that should have always been yours, take it as your sign. Do it today. Share this with someone who needs it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.